Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Into the Deep podcast with Father Theodore and me, David Guirguis. Today we're sitting down to discuss the Orthodox family. Um, so why did you want to have this episode be on family? What do you want to discuss? And
Well, for me, I think this is something that is probably one of the most important things that we could talk about. Like, if we get sort of our families correct, then, everything in our life or most things of our life is working much better and more correctly. For me personally, I can speak personally, most of what keeps us as priests busy are stemming some way or another from family issues, whether it be issues between a husband and wife, sometimes issues between siblings, sometimes issues between sons and daughters and their parents, you know, healing issues that happened for people when they were children, and that manifest themselves, later on in their adult life. You know, my day is taken up with healing those issues that God wasn't a priority in those people's lives, or they didn't have the examples that they should have, and because of that, bad things happen. So the best way for us to have like a good, like, exponential generational impact on the society around us, not just our church, like on the society around us, is through like this cultivating of these Orthodox families that have God, at their center. If we get it correct in the homes, then we can give the next generations, the best opportunity. It's not like a guarantee, of course, because at the end of the day, everybody has their own free will and their own choices, but gives them the next generations the best opportunity to experience, share the love of Christ, not just within the context of the church, but also in the greater context of the world around us.
so when we say family, I just want to clarify for going forward. You can kind of fit into three categories, and most people, well, actually, all people fit into one for sure,
Yes,
two probably, and then hopefully three,
sure.
which is, like for a man, it would be son, husband, and then father eventually.
Yes, and sibling could be
Oh,
brother.
and
It could
so,
be
okay.
brother. Yeah,
And then same for,
yeah,
the
and
other
I
end.
think all of those dynamics are very important. We can touch a little bit on the relationship between the husband and wife. I'm sure actually that probably would lend itself to a whole nother episode in and of itself. But we should touch on that a little bit. I think touching on what it means as parents, what is our role as parents to raise strong Orthodox children. What does it mean being a son or a daughter of Orthodox parents, and how does that look? What is my relation? What should my relationship with my parents? What it ought to look like?
Mhm.
So I think those are all things that we can discuss and benefit from, hopefully.
So this will be applicable to all aspects of all family.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think so. Maybe if you were an only child who lost both of your parents and live on your own, but even then, you're in the context of a greater family, which is
Mhm.
the body of Christ. But yes, I think it's pretty applicable to everybody.
Okay. So you titled this one the family altar, and that's probably gonna be the name of this episode. Why is it referred to as the family altar? Why is that?
The reason I wanted to call it the family altar, I hope you think it's as catchy as I do, but why I liked it is because what do we do at the altar? Okay, what is the primary function of the altar? Even in the Old Testament, what was the primary function of the altar? That was the place where we offered sacrifice, right?
Mhm.
And so, in the context of the family, I think that still holds very true. I offer sacrifice within the context of my family. So, like, when I am, like, if you I don't know, did you go, like, when you were in college, did you live on your own?
Yeah. As soon as I went to college, I lived in the dorms the first year, and then after that, it was
Yeah.
apartment.
So, like, I lived on my own when I was in college too, and when you lived on your own, you ate when you want, you slept when you want, you kept your dorm as clean or as messy as you wanted to. You kind of, actually, there was nobody to um, answer to.
Hmm.
I did whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. When I got roommates, it changed slightly. I had to maybe think about them a little bit, but still,
Hmm.
I did essentially whatever I wanted whenever I wanted to. The context of family sort of creates a necessity. By necessity, I have to sacrifice. There is death to this independent life. I'm not just living for myself. I'm living for others, and that applies, by the way, in every relationship. We probably think of it as mothers and fathers ought to be sacrificial to their children, and that's certainly the case. But children ought to be sacrificial to their parents as well. Siblings have to be sacrificial to one another. A husband and wife have to be sacrificial to one another. So when I say the family altar, this is the place in which I can work out my salvation. When we think about virtues like patience, when we think about virtues like being slow to anger, when we think about patience like love or kindness or gentleness, how do I exercise that muscle? I mean, the best place to exercise it is in the context of my family, right?
Mhm.
These people make me angry, and I deal with it in a holy way. These people make me lose my temper, or try to make me lose my temper, and I'm able to control myself. So there is this offering of a sacrifice, this concept of putting down my life for the sake of somebody else, putting my partners or my children or my parents' needs above my own. All of those things, sort of demonstrate to me sort of the word sacrifice or the idea of sacrifice.
So I'd never think of, or I've never thought of the idea of children having to sacrifice for their parents. To me, it's always been the other way around. So I'm curious, and I'm sure we'll get into all the examples of each kind of sacrifice, but
Sure.
what are some ways that a child would sacrifice to their parents?
Well, I mean, first of all, like one of the biggest ways in which I sacrifice to my parents as a child is I sacrifice, like actually in the liturgy, in the Gregorian liturgy, the priest, he says, I offer to you, o my master, the symbols of my freedom. Like the priest is offering himself his freedom. He is guiding his works according to his saying, according to God's saying. So he's giving up his freedom. In the same way, like for children, if I am going to honor my father and mother, I give up some level of autonomy, right? My parents tell me my curfew is at 10. Okay. I'm unconvinced that it matters if I come home at 10 or 10:30 or 11, right?
Mhm.
So I am sacrificing my autonomy, right? For the sake of the family. My parents give me rules or guidance as far as, my room being cleaned or the chores that I have to do or the dishes that I have to do. And I follow them, not maybe because I'm always convinced, right? But I follow them sacrificing my free will for, the greater good, trusting in the authority of my parents.
I feel like that's a little different than offering your, um, freedom to like in the church to God, because
What's the difference, you think?
I think the difference is there's no, if I choose to not go to church or I'm choosing my freedom over that,
Sure.
there's no active punishment, right? But I feel like that's not the case in the home life.
Well, actually, that's my point is, if the home life if the Orthodox family is functioning correctly, the fact that you receive immediate consequence to your disobedience or whatever the case may be should remind you that there is consequence to my lack of obedience even in the afterlife eternally.
Mhm.
Even though like the scripture says that God is patient, not desiring the death of any sinners, but everybody to return and live. And so he's long suffering towards us. We should not confuse that long suffering for like slackness. That's what scripture tells us, that like we shouldn't confuse him waiting and giving us an opportunity, that like, oh, he's not going to punish. He's not going to have consequences for the reward for the good and punishment for the evil. And that is a thing. And so I learn it. Where do I learn it first? I learn it first in the context of my home, even when I'm very, very young, right? I learn the context of like, if I don't do my homework, I don't get my snack or treat or whatever the case may be. I learn it when I'm very little,
Mhm.
that there are consequences to my actions. And that helps you even in regular life, right? When you start working, you realize, oh, I don't turn in my work on time. I don't get that promotion, or I get fired, or, life is all about consequences. And, the family is kind of the first place where you kind of learn that.
I mean, it like it seems like it's a lot easier said than done. Like in the ideal, like everyone sacrifices for each other, and we have this perfect, you know, Orthodox household.
Sure.
Uh, I feel like that's not normally the case, or everyone kind of
So
is flawed, right?
of course, it's an ideal that I am striving towards. I think what's important, like if people are listening and they're thinking about choosing a spouse, or if people are listening and they're about to have children, or if people are listening, even if people are listening and they are children, we should all at least be on the same page of what is it that we aspire to be. You know what I mean? If we don't share this same aspiration, then actually we're running for different goals. You could have many different goals. And like if I'm a father, my goal might be I want to provide the best living experience for my spouse and my children. And so everything that I do, even if I'm not perfect, I do that towards that goal. Start a new job, open a new business, take on extra hours, because what is my goal? What is my main goal is to provide the best life possible for my children. So what I'm saying is we should all aspire to have a same shared goal, which is that our house is the family altar. Do we fall short of that? Every day. Every day we're falling short of that. But when we have the same aspiration, then we can share some accountability, and we can have discussions about how to get ourselves back on track. But like if we don't even share it, let's say I come to you and I say, you my son are chores are part of this family, and we're all sacrificing for one another. And you're like, hey, I'm just here to have fun. Like I'm not here for chores. I'm here to have fun. I try to bring you back to that center. If you don't share with me that aspiration, we will never see eye to eye.
Mm-hmm.
So my hopes is not to give you sort of some sort of ideal and to look at it and for you to be like, oh, I'm falling short of that. We're never going to make it. My dad does this. My mom does that. But it's sort of maybe to open a discussion even within families for them to say, hey, what is our goal as a family? What is it that we are, aspiring to achieve as a unit? And I would hope that would be on the same page, that we are trying to achieve, God's glory within the context of our family. So then we start to talk about, well, how does it look? What does that look like? And then I can start to say, well, what are the things that I'm doing that is working towards that goal? And I want to continue to do those and encourage them. And what are the things that I'm doing that is kind of working away from that goal? And I need to change them or have them change, help by the grace of God, have them change in my life. I can't even do that if we're not sharing the same goal.
Okay. And I mean, are there any people we can look at in the Bible that kind of give this example of what the ideal household looks like? Because the first story I think of is like Abraham and Isaac, and I wouldn't like run to my dad and be like, you should listen to, you know what I mean? Like, are there any other kind of?
There are a lot of good examples, but again, I would say like even the examples, they are not necessarily meaning that they are perfect people. Mm-hmm. Okay. But there's a good example that I like to think about in the Bible, in the book of Acts, Priscilla and Aquila. And they are a godly family, husband and wife. They were two Jewish people who were expelled from Rome by the emperor, and they found themselves eventually to be in Corinth. And they actually opened their home to St. Paul. They gave St. Paul like a place to stay, and they learned about God from St. Paul. And besides welcoming St. Paul to their house, they also they helped him in spreading the gospel. They traveled with him to Ephesus. They continued to teach others about Christianity. They had hospitality. They were generous. They were committing in serving to God. They also they knew about the gospel. They had a lot of knowledge of the gospel. There was a person who was speaking to them. His name is Apollos. And when he visited the church in Ephesus, the couple had teach him about the full knowledge of the gospel. They didn't understand everything about the Holy Spirit. And it was after their time together that Apollos became like a preacher himself, but he couldn't have done that without being taught by Priscilla and Aquila. And not only that, they did all those things and they taught and they supported St. Paul. They were actually willing to put their own lives sort of in danger and to protect him, to protect St. Paul. When Jewish people from the synagogues in Ephesus, when they were looking for St. Paul to exact some sort of justice against him, they hid him in their house. They risked imprisonment and death to protect him. So the example serves, I think, good example for a husband and wife, that they are centering their life around God. That they stood beside each other in difficult times. They were welcoming others to their home. They're teaching others God's love. Can learn from their example. One thing that I would mention is maybe there might be people listening that they're young and they don't have their own home, right? They don't live, or they're not married yet and they live in their home. When you're not married, you don't have the ability really to be hospitable, right? You can't go to church and invite people to your church, to your home. You see somebody who doesn't have too much of a family and you can't invite them to, your house for Easter or Christmas or something like that, because it's not your home actually. It's your parents' home. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe in some cases, but generally I don't feel comfortable to do that. And I would take this as a challenge for people who maybe if they're newly married or if they're married and they've never thought about this, is like just the concept of opening my home for the sake of Christ, whether it be to fellow believers, inquirers, people that are new to the church, people that are struggling, that are part of the body of Christ. That's a big thing that can make a big effect on people. I think more than anything, people want to be heard. Maybe people feel like they need someone to lean on, someone to talk to, and the concept of opening my home in that way can be very powerful.
It's very interesting to me that this example, they're not even actual family, but
You mean in the sense that they don't have kids?
no, like
Oh, like St. Paul with
St. Paul with,
Priscilla and-
like they open
yeah.
their home and
Yeah.
like now they have become this like
Oh, it's
They-
almost like
they-
a family unit of themselves.
yeah, but
Yeah.
they're not like family like in the sense of the way
Flesh.
I was thinking of it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That even takes it a step further of like if this is how people can be with people that aren't their family, how much more should we be with our family?
Yeah, and I think exactly. Actually, that's a great point. Like they're treating St. Paul in this way because of how valuable they feel his message is and what he's doing is, and how much more should we treat the people who, especially when I'm thinking from a perspective of parents, I've been entrusted. God is gonna. One thing that I like to remind like people when they baptize their children, the commands that we give. One of the things we say is God is going to hold you accountable. For it's actually very and actually they agree. Like they agree when when we baptize their children, they agree like, hey, our children are going to fast Wednesdays and Fridays. Our children are going to go to matins and vespers. Our children are going to celebrate the feasts of the church. And I think God is going to hold us accountable when we fall short in those things. So it's a great reminder. And even if I don't have any, like I'm not a parent, but I'm held at least for myself accountable to those same things when I was baptized.
I have a kind of a weird question on that. Up until what point are you accountable? Because I feel like there gets to a point where, like, for example, my parents took me to church growing up and I really didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
And then when I had kind of my own freedom and I
Yeah.
was in college and decided, I took a step away from church kind
Sure.
of thing. I feel like my parents still felt responsible for me and that they were kind of failing in their obligations, but it had nothing to do with them.
They weren't doing anything wrong, you don't think?
Yeah, I don't think you can blame them
Sure.
for my decisions at that time.
Yeah.
Are they still accountable for me at that point, or have I kind of separated?
That's a good question. I think like as good parents, they will always feel a sense of responsibility. We have lots of examples. The most famous example of that is Saint Monica and Saint Augustine. Like when Saint Augustine was far from the church, Saint Monica would pray for him. Saint Monica would annoy Saint Ambrose and be like, "You have to pray for him, and you have to check up." Kind of. So she always felt a level of responsibility, and I guess it's a good point to bring up that I would hate for people to listen to this and say to themselves, I thought I did everything that I could and my kids still went astray. That means I must have done something terribly wrong. And that's not necessarily the case. It might be the case, but it's not necessarily the case. You can do everything right. Look at who is our biggest example of a true father, God himself. And God gives us, like we say in the liturgy, all the remedies that lead to life. He gives us everything we need to be good, to be holy. And we still screw it up. Does that mean that God fell short as a parent, as a father? Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
But God gives us our autonomy, and your parents eventually they give you your own autonomy, right? And so there's a shared responsibility at some point where I have my own, I'm responsible for my own actions. But I will have to say, like, you said, like, in your personal experience, like, okay, my parents raised me like a perfect right way and did all these things that we're going to talk about, and they did all those things and I ignored it. But I would say also is like, later in life, you leaned back on those things that you had learned, or at least the sentiment or the values that have been impressed upon you, even if for a period of time you left them or ignored them. They were still there. And because they were there, once your heart was willing, it was easy. You wouldn't be like, well, where do I start? Because actually, I know where I need to start, right? I start with the church. I start with repentance. I start with prayer. Like you know because you saw it. So even that, that's something that they established and ingrained within you. But of course, you have your own personal responsibility. I would hate to add on to the guilt of a mother or father that they feel like, oh, I haven't done enough.
So on the other end of that, I feel like something that I see very commonly, especially in like Egyptian culture, is the lack of giving that autonomy, or like, for example, when I was going to pick a college, like I was able to apply wherever I wanted to and do whatever I wanted. And in my head, my first thought was get as far away from my parents as possible. And
So you were applying like what, East Coast?
I applied. I wanted to stay in California, but just like
Far
I
away
picked
from
the
them
furthest
within-
school that I
Sure.
could think of. But I ended up just going only like a couple hours away, so it wasn't
Yeah.
that bad. But I know cases where there are parents who won't let their
Sure.
kids apply outside of their hometown, like
Sure.
type of thing.
Sure.
Do you think that that's wrong? Or, I mean, it's hard to say right or wrong, right? Because
Yeah.
everyone's different.
I don't think that there's maybe necessarily right or wrong, but I will say, like, from a parent's standpoint, I would think about what the intentions of my heart. Maybe I have a child that I know. I put them in a good situation, they're going to be great. I put them in a bad situation, they're going to be bad. And so, like, I want to maybe shelter them from that. Maybe as a child, I have in my in my mind what you're saying. Like, I want to get as far away. Well, why? Right? I want to get as far away because I want to be able to do the things that I know that they wouldn't approve of. And there's some other dynamics. It's like, when I have a parent who is essentially bankrolling my education, do they have a say in where I go? I think that would be a reasonable expectation. I think that the individualism that we are sort of surrounded by within American culture is good in many aspects, but I don't think it's perfect in everything. So, like, when I make a decision, like in more Eastern cultures, not just Middle Eastern, but in Eastern cultures in general, when I make decisions in more communal cultures, I make decisions and I think about a lot how this affects my community, my family, my extended family, even my community, whether that be my church or whatever the case may be. Here, in America, where it's sort of taught, everybody is responsible for their own decisions, and our decisions are our own, and our consequences are our own. But for me, I believe that we're very interconnected, and I think that in big decisions, I ought to take the opinions of those around me that I trust. Not to say that at the end of the day, sometimes I do have to make a decision that maybe goes against family or extended family or against my children's advice or whatever the case may be. But to not consider them at all seems a little bit extreme.
I guess I can agree. I can agree with that in the sense that you still have the choice yourself, but to be like, because your parents are funding your education,
Sure.
using that as almost like a restriction, like, hey, because I'm paying, or because you can't afford it, or this.
Well, there's a more spiritual thing than that. It's like, actually, if I as a child, I tell people, what does obedience mean? Obedience means I do what I'm told when I do not agree. Okay. Obedience doesn't mean do it when I agree, or else it's not obedience. We were on the same page. And if I truly am going to be obedient, unless my parents are going to tell me something that is morally wrong to do, if my parents told me to lie or to steal or something like that, I ought to obey God rather than man, and I should ignore my parents. But short of that, I should be obedient, right? So I don't think they have to pull the lever of I'm the one bankrolling this, so therefore you have to follow my lead. Actually, by virtue of their position as parent, they have authority over you. Even in weddings, what do we say? We say, like, now for after this wedding, this person is responsible about you instead of your parents. So that means up until that point, as far as the eyes of the church, who was responsible for this person? The parents.
Okay. I have two different approaches that I want to kind of dissect. On one hand, everything you're saying sounds really good. I agree. If we are going off the basis that everyone has the same goal in that
Yes.
our family is
Agree.
okay.
Agree.
And
that's not always the case.
right. So in the case where that is not the case, or I guess how could you as a child, I get a two-part question. How do you as a child determine or differentiate, are my parents kind of leading in a way that is Christ-like and putting our family,
Yes.
or are they just abusing this power that I have to be obedient to them? That's the first
Sure.
part of the question. Second part is, how can I, as a hopefully one day parent, avoid going the route of
Yeah.
I'm just a dictator and
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, when we, as a parent, when I create restrictions, I try to do it in the same way, or I would like to think that I try to do it in the same way that God does. When God creates limits and restrictions for us, why does he do so? They are not arbitrary rules to flex his authority, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are meant for our own good. One of the most obvious examples of that, when God asks us to forgive, why does he ask us to forgive? And for me, I truly believe, of course, it's a reflection of God himself, but it is healing for myself to forgive. It's better for me that I forgive rather than to live in bitterness and hatred. It's freeing for me. So when God puts these restrictions for me, they are for me, for my benefit. So if in an ideal world, and again, to your question, maybe we'll get that in a minute, I have to first trust, right? And actually that goes with God too. If I'm going to follow God's commands, it's because I trust him, right? If I'm going to follow my parents' commands, it's because there's trust there. So do I trust that the reason they put down this command is for my benefit alone? Then sure. Like for example, you're getting married and then your parents say, oh, you know what? You need to live here in California where we are. And for you and your, prospective spouse, that's not what you want and that's not what you desire. And maybe your job market, whatever reason, that's not what you want. It's important to understand the intention of the parents. Is the intention of the parents like, I want my children next to me and they should be close? And are there like selfish intentions there, or are there true needs that might be reflected? Is there a danger in your case that if you go, that something bad might happen to you, and then they're trying to mitigate that? So I do have, well, as I get older, the level of autonomy sort of increases, and I have to do a little bit of seeking for myself about the intention behind whatever the case may be. Like when I'm a kid, when I'm like 5, and my dad says no candy, I just do it. Like there's not really much to rationalize about it, and maybe as I get older, I have a level of, right, when I'm older, I can eat candy whenever I want. And so if my dad tells me no candy, it's kind of a weird command when I'm 30 years old that my dad was telling me no candy, right? So, I mean, your level of autonomy increases as you age, because if you're a good parent, what you're trying to do is raise independent children that are able to function without you, not because to separate yourself from them, but that they have the ability to make their own decisions, do the things that are morally right without you sort of, over their shoulder.
And I guess it's hard to assume these things, especially like for someone like me, because I'm almost like the kind of person when my mom says something, like I instantly will do the opposite.
But that's sort of that reveals something in you, like, right? So you're saying when my mom says something, I automatically want to do the opposite. So actually, you're not having a problem with the actual command.
Oh no.
So the problem is actually within you. You have a problem of maybe pride of like, I want to do what I want to do, even if what I want to do is what she said. I want me to say it. And so that's what I was saying earlier when I was talking about the family unit is the place in which I can refine my virtues and work on my vices because I see it for myself. I think, you said it yourself. It's like, okay, isn't it eye-opening to you that you say, like, no matter what she says, I kind of want to do the opposite, right? Why is that? What is it about me or about her or the combination of me and her that causes that? Is there something on her end that could mitigate that? Probably. Is there something on your end that could help that? Probably as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was your mom's birthday yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell her happy birthday.
Yeah, I called her on the day before, and my dad goes, "Is there something important happening tomorrow?" I was like, "Yeah, it's Wednesday." But then, of course, I called her and told her happy birthday next day. But
Good.
yeah, it's interesting. I think part of me does it now as more of a joke than anything, but it's become
But
like
at one point it was real. It was.
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely, I was not someone that I would have wanted to put up with in my earlier years. The idea of like working on your vices is very actually something you said reminded me of something from another episode that we haven't released yet. But the idea of forgiving is for yourself.
Sure.
Is very similar to what we discussed about prayer in the C.S. Lewis episode that we're going to release. Is that it's not, you're doing it for
yourself.
Like, is that the case with a lot of the things that we're told to do? Is all for us?
God is not sitting there with arbitrary rules just to see how high you jump, or if you're going to contort yourself in this direction. When God says, do not kill, it's for us to have like an orderly society in which we're not fearing for our lives, right? When God says do not lie, it's so that we can build trust with one another. Like all the virtues have like a practical implication about like what it is. When we had a year back or so a case, episode about abortion. Why? It was because we value life, or we value the defense of the defenseless, right? These are tenets that are beneficial to us. They're not just arbitrary rules. Sometimes we look at them as arbitrary rules.
I don't think I've ever looked at it past the arbitrary rule part. Like, I've never heard to like not do something and then thought, why would I not want to do that?
Yeah.
This is the first time I've like...
One of the things I always say to people is like, if I were to follow the moral commandments of the Bible, if society would follow the moral commandments of the Bible perfectly, you would have basically a utopian society, because people are doing exactly what would make their own lives actually better. Your life would be better for it. It wouldn't just be, I'm following God's commands, so therefore I'm going to get blessed, although that is part of it. But your life would be better.
So maybe this probably has to be a whole nother episode, but I'm going to ask it just because maybe it's the part of social media that I'm on. Why does it seem like society as a whole is like almost doing what I do with my mom about this situation? Like they are completely disregarding everything that the Bible would say and kind of going towards this because extreme opposite.
Exactly. Very similarly to why you did it, right? You wanted autonomy. Your number one goal was, I want to do what I want to do. Even though what you wanted to do was like actually self-harming. It was to your detriment. But you don't always see that way. If I trust my parents, I think to myself that they have a perspective that I do not, that they may have a history that I do not know about, that they have seen things or heard things from their own life experiences or the experiences of others that they're leaning on in order to make these decisions that to you seem arbitrary. And I'm unwilling to believe or trust that. I don't want anybody to restrict me. If I want to go, I go. If I want to come, I come. Like that's how I want to live my life. And the same with moral commands. Many people actually reject God, not from an argument of like facts or knowledge, but simply from, if I believe in God, that means I have to follow his moral tenets, and that means my life will change. And I don't want it to. I like my life. I like the way it is.
Do you think that all comes down to like being prideful, in the sense that like I would rather be wrong and ruin my life on my terms than live my life on someone else's terms, even though it would be exponentially better?
I do, but I also don't think that people think they're ruining their lives. Like
they think they're doing
when you were again, going back to your example, when you were disobeying your mother, you were thinking, I'm doing what's best for myself.
No. I was just being annoying.
Well,
okay, let's assume that most people would probably
yes. When I'm disobeying my parents, I think to myself, because I know better, and I want this better thing for me,
right?
And so, but that's not always the case. And now we're talking about parents who are flawed, right? Your parents could be wrong about what's best for you.
Yeah.
But God the Father, he's perfect, and so when He's giving me a command, it is the perfect right thing for me, not just for Him. What does God benefit from my obedience, actually, when you think about it? What does God benefit from my obedience? Nothing.
I don't think it would. Well, let's say I don't think it would matter to
In the
him.
Gregorian liturgy, we say, you have no need of my servitude,
Right.
but rather I need your lordship. I'm the one who is in need. I am the one that this framework assists. It's not you that it's like, oh, I have these minions that are doing my bidding that helps me in some way, shape, or form. God is complete in who he is.
I wonder if there's a way for those stubborn people out there like me to twist this in a way where like, I want to be selfish, so I'm going to listen to everything God says for me because it's going to benefit. I've never thought of it.
I would love for people to do that actually, because even if I'm thinking from a selfish point of view, like what type of person do you want to be around? A selfish person or a generous person?
A generous person.
Yeah. So like what type of person do you want to be around? A loving person or a person with hatred? What kind of person do you want to be around? A person that forgives or a person that holds grudges? You know, for you will find in your own life success. Not to say that it won't also cause tribulation, right? For example, when I think I want to follow the tenet of honesty, sometimes that's hard. And sometimes it's to my detriment. You know, when I'm at work, I'm like, who blew this report? And I'm like, oh, it was Steve. You know, it's kind of like, that's easy for me so I can get out of trouble. But it creates distrust or mistrust.
I actually think people would want to be around people like them. Because if I'm a hateful person, I wouldn't want to be around a loving person.
If you were a dishonest person, would you want to be around people you could not trust?
If I was a dishonest person, I don't think I would fit in with the people that are trustworthy. Like, I feel like I would want to be around other dishonest people to justify my own dishonesty.
But you would always be looking around back behind your shoulder. Like you have to verify everything. It would be a very anxiety-inducing life.
Yeah.
And people choose that. You're right, because they want what's familiar.
Interesting. Okay. Sorry, we got off on a huge
it's
huge
okay.
tangent.
It's good.
What are there any other examples in the Bible that you can think of that we could draw off of or take the good attributes of?
Well, actually, there's an example that in the early church that I love and I talk about a lot. Saint Macrina. Actually, this family, there's two Saint Macrinas: Saint Macrina the Elder and Saint Macrina the Younger. Saint Macrina the Elder had a daughter. Her name was Emilia. And Emilia had many children, one of whom she named Macrina after her mother. So that's Macrina the Younger.
Mm-hmm.
And Macrina the Younger was one of 9 siblings. 2 of them are people who are super famous, Saint Basil the Great and Saint Gregory of Nyssa. And there's another famous person. His name is Saint Peter of Sebasta. And they had a few other siblings. Actually, this woman, she had a marriage arranged for her, but her fiance died before they were to get married. And once she was betrothed, she thought to herself, you know what? I was betrothed and my fiance died. I'm going to give up a life of family and I'm going to live celibate. So she devoted her life to her faith and to her family, actually. And a lot of bad things actually happened in her family. She had one of her brothers, she died really suddenly. And it was her job, or what job or role of service she took on. She was comforting her mother. Can you imagine, like, you know, you're the child who lost your brother and you're comforting your mom. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than a father or mother losing their kid. And she was comforting them. She was correcting Saint Basil the Great, who actually the whole of Christendom looks up to, because they sent him off to like school to learn philosophy. So he was kind of like, he knew his stuff, and he was being a little bit like prideful, and she would correct him for his pride. There's a really nice writing from St. Gregory called On the Soul and the Resurrection. And he was coming back he's a bishop, and he's coming back from a synod meeting, like a meeting of bishops. And he's asking St. Macrina, well, what do you think about what happens to us after we die and our bodies after the resurrection? So here is St. Macrina the Younger teaching her brother, the bishop, or educating him further on the faith. So it's like, why I love this example so much is, St. Macrina was not an ordained anything. St. Macrina had no official role, but St. Macrina influenced the lives of these people in a very deep and profound way, which allowed them, in turn, to have such a great influence in the church. There's a really nice book about the life of Macrina. I hope we can link it to the podcast. It's called The Life of Macrina by Saint Gregory. And there's someone actually, they reached out to me and they said they they retranslated it. Like I've seen it before in older translations. It's nice to have like a more common language translation. So hopefully we can link that for people to see. But it's a beautiful book about the influence you can have within the context of the family. Like this is a family who really, they had the household was an altar, like we've been talking about.
This might be a dumb question, but Saint Basil the Great and Gregory of Nyssa.
Yeah.
Is that the same as the Gregorian liturgy? And
Saint Basil is the same Basil.
Saint Basil's one, but
Yeah.
the Gregorian is different.
I think it's a different one. Yeah, I think it's a different one.
Yeah, I've never heard of Saint Macrina before, but I've definitely heard of obviously Saint Basil and Saint Gregory.
Sure.
And I never would have thought that like this person kind of in the shadows influenced the people we hear about all the time in such a way.
Exactly. And actually, what I like about it too is, it's not even a lot of times, and we've been talking a little bit too, is like the parents' responsibility towards the children. But actually, Saint Macrina took a role of responsibility towards the mother. We talked about in the first couple of minutes, like, what do you mean as a child sacrifices for their parent? But she's sort of putting aside or controlling her sorrow for the loss of her brother in order to support her mother for the loss of her son.
So I'm sure everyone listening to this is kind of putting themselves in whatever role of the family that they are. What do you have any like kind of things you'd like to see? Or like, for example, the father should be doing this, the mother should be doing this, the children, like, are there specific examples for each role that you can kind of say that you think you'd like to see?
The thing that I'm going to say, and maybe I feel I have to apologize for putting undue pressure on, one group over another, but because it takes a family, it takes everybody working together. But I actually am a big believer that a holy family begins with the father. Okay. When Joshua, like very famously, people have it all over in the house all the time, that says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And that's Joshua. And Joshua actually is able to make this resolve and speak on behalf of his family, saying, you guys can do whatever you want. Me and my family, we're going to serve the Lord. How could he speak for his family? Because he knew them very well. He had influence over them, right? Sometimes, like as fathers, we feel like I should have influence by virtue of my position as father. I'm the dad. You do what I say. And while that may technically be the case, what's much more powerful is you are followed because I trust where you're leading me. I lead by example, and I trust where you're leading me. You joked about Abraham and Isaac. Abraham had a godly influence over his family, and so much so that God even testified of that. He says, "For I have known him," he's talking about Abraham, "in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him." So he's saying that, like, I trust that Abraham is going to do what? Command his children and his household to keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness, to do justice, right? He has to have that influence. So as spouses, as parents, as a father, as a mother, we have the responsibility to prepare, as a husband, I have the responsibility to prepare my wife, my children to be worthy and to have a desire to serve God. We're stewards as a father and, as a parent, as a husband of the children and of our children and our wives. God entrusted them to us. We're going to be held accountable for them. So I have to prepare them in order to be following in the way. So not to put, so much pressure on just one person, but I do feel that it starts with the father. And then, of course, I think the next person, to speak about would be the wife or the mother, to be a mother that is supporting the husband, to being a helpmate, doing the things that allow him to further the family, to, actually, I think in many families, the mother is the one who has such a big role in teaching piety to the children in early life, in very early life. because they're with them more and they're feeding them, and not in every case, but I think in many cases. And so for me, for the family to be functioning correctly, the mother has to be like knowledgeable about her faith, not knowledgeable like a theologian, but knowledgeable in the sense of like, I'm able to teach you, I'm able to say little stories, teach you saint stories, teach you small prayers, because I'm interacting with my child on a very regular basis.
Also, everything kind of trickles down then, right?
Yes,
Like from one generation to the next. Like I'm thinking of it for me, like my parents put those things in me so that I could one day become a husband and then lead my wife
exactly.
and serve the Lord, and then she will then teach our kids.
Exactly. Exactly. And like for parents out there who want their kids to have a good marriage, the best way you can guarantee that they have a good marriage is for you to have a good marriage, because you're modeling for them expectations, right? When you as a son are seeing how your father is treating your mother, or how your mother is being treated, you think to yourself, this is normal, this is what should happen, this is how it should be. And in the cases where it's not normal, then you get a skewed understanding of what's normal. And then one of two things happen. Either the person internalizes that and recognizes, oh, this can't be the way, and they do everything they can to be better and be the opposite. Or what is actually most common is I follow suit. I find this, I find the same problems that I find because it's sort of like a familiarity. I kind of lean towards it. It's a
Mm.
big responsibility.
I have a quick question about Joshua's that
As
quote
for
you
me
said.
and my house, we will serve the Lord. Yeah.
He's not saying that just because I was thinking about it now from something you said. He's not saying that from like a place of like I'm the father, everyone will listen to me, but he's more saying it as like I know my family, we all have this common goal, and as a result of that, this is what's going to happen.
Well, I'll tell you the greater context. Like at the time, like they were unsure, should we follow God's commands about entering into the promised land or not, and what should we do? And Joshua kind of laid it out there and said, you guys can choose. Me and my family, we're going to serve the Lord. Like he's speaking on behalf of his family. But I'm saying the only way he could speak on behalf of his family is if he knows his family and has the influence over his family to do so. And why I'm saying that is like a lot of times, or not a lot of times, but there are times when a father thinks his role is provider, and that is a role of the father. But then if the father is distant emotionally from his wife, from his children, he cannot have the influence that he needs to be able to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, right? Collecting a paycheck and putting food on the table and a roof over your head, it's not a small thing. It's a wonderful thing. But it doesn't garner the same level of love and attachment that time spent with a son or daughter or spouse or shared experiences, values that are passed down. Those are the things that really create that attachment.
So I'm very curious. A lot of what we've been saying has been kind of the at home family life, or I
Yeah.
feel like that's the way I've been
Yeah.
interpreting it. What role does the church play in this? Obviously, there's going to church, taking communion, all these
Sure.
things, but is there any other way that the church influences the family life?
First, I'll say like the main role of the church is the sacramental life of the church. This is where I receive the sacraments, where my children are baptized and confirmed, where we repent and confess, where we receive the body and blood of Christ, where we're married. This is where we receive the graces of the sacraments. So that's first and foremost the role of the church. But also the church has a role in ensuring that the whole family is living in service to God, not just as individuals, but like together. So for us as a church, we have to be creative in creating services that families can participate in together. But the church's role is auxiliary to the main role of the mother and the father. It can't be the main people or the main event. There's a really nice couple of chapters in First Chronicles, and in First Chronicles, like chapters 23 to 26, and it's listing families from the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe, and how those various families were serving, and how they're using their unique gifts to serve God. And they performed the ceremonies, they were making food, they were worshiping through music, they were managing the tabernacle and the temple, they were managing the money. We have to encourage families to explore serving in the church. One of the things that I see sometimes in the church is we segregate the congregation, not intentionally, but we segregate the congregation. What I mean by that is like, there's children's choir, there's a youth meeting, there is meeting for women, there's meeting for men, there's activities that are done that by their nature separate the family. And I don't think there's enough things that are done that by their nature allow us to have the family unit together and working together. I mean, the biggest place that we do that, I suppose, is the liturgical life itself. In the liturgy, we all worship together.
Mm-hmm.
But, short of this, like we need to be creative in having services that incorporate entire families, whether that be services within the church or services, to the community itself.
So I'm going to kind of throw myself under the bus here. One thing I don't think this is talked about enough, and I'll say that I'm throwing myself under the bus, but I'm also saying I got really, really lucky. This whole concept of the husband or the father, husband first, then father, hopefully, is that you have to be the priest of the house and
Sure.
you lead your family.
Sure.
I feel like that was not emphasized to me enough prior to marriage, and that it was something I learned after marriage that I was like, that's kind of a big responsibility.
Yes.
And I definitely don't do a good enough job with that personally. And I'm a very practical person. So and hopefully there are some people listening that are also the same way, that are practical and want a way to fix that with some steps. Like, give me a guide here.
Well, I think I'll give some steps, as a father or as a husband, but I think also some of it can apply as a mother to children and as a father to children. If I want to build up like in practical way and to be like the head of the household in a spiritual sense, I have to keep God in our minds, keep him in our vocabulary. How often do you talk to your wife about, this sermon that I listened to that I really benefited from, or this passage in scripture that I really liked and I wanted to share, this lesson that God was teaching me at work or at school or in the service, and I share it. It has to be sort of part of like what I don't want, or what I'm not saying is sit the person down and I'm going to give you a sermon. Okay. No one likes sermons. Nobody even likes when I go to church and give a sermon. People don't want to listen to sermons, right? People want to see a life lived, so that it's a natural outpouring of who you are. So, when I read something and it truly does inspires me, it helps me, it helped me get over a problem, it helped me see something in a new way, I should share that. The same way that you expect, for example, your spiritual father to ask you, have you been praying? Have you been reading your Bible? When was the last time you confessed? It's not a wrong thing. Actually, it's a good thing for you to ask those things of your spouse. And even vice versa, your spouse should ask those things. There's some mutual accountability. For your children, I would think about like in simple, uncomplicated ways, especially, given like their age, depending on their age, they understand the concept that Christ came for my sins, the underlying need to have my sins forgiven. I need to teach and instruct in those things. I need to teach and instruct about God's word, tell them about a Bible verse, help them to know the reference. I was at a conference maybe about a month ago called the Bold Evangelism Conference, and it was about how to evangelize. One of the things that, as we were discussing, we sort of came to the realization for us, many of us, we're very uncomfortable to like speak about our faith. And, one of the things that I think is the reason why we're uncomfortable to speak about our faith is because we don't do it in the context of the home. If you were to be constantly articulated to you, like, why am I Orthodox? Why am I Orthodox? What is the value in being Orthodox? What does my Orthodox faith bring to me? And we are articulating this within the home. When I get asked this outside of my home, it's a natural answer because it's an answer that I truly have heard and believed and lived, rather than sort of being like, oh, I don't know, I guess just because, we haven't necessarily articulated it. So I think having those intentional conversations, and more than having those intentional conversations, I have to live it, right? My actions are going to speak louder than my words.
Okay, so I have a couple things that I'm writing down so I don't forget. The idea of talking about faith or like discussing it in the home, maybe this is just a me thing, but I think growing up I was always kind of like put off by things like that. Maybe not in a way that's like, I probably have to sit down and really think about why I was like this, but to the point where like when people would say simple, just typical stuff, I wouldn't know how to respond. They like people would always respond with like, "Oh, how are you doing?" Like, "Oh, I'm good, thank God." And it's like, hmm, it's like, oh, it's this is that kind of person. You know what I mean? Like,
I think 'cause a lot of times, we do things that are sort of unspoken and unexplained. Like when someone says, for me, when someone asks me, how did this thing go? And I say, well, it went well, blah, 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 thank God. What I am doing, like very practically, what I'm doing is reminding myself that the thing that was done, if it weren't for God's assistance, I would not able to do it. It's a reminder for me that I don't achieve things on my own. And that's why I say it. That's why I thank God. And so, like, maybe I do the practice without explicitly saying, why am I doing this practice? So then when you hear it, it's like, oh, does he just want to just like interject God into everything? It kind of feels like it's very in my face.
mm, maybe, yeah, I guess.
I think we're,
I,
we're, we're uncomfortable a little bit with like, sharing in like God's works in our lives, which by the way, like this is a command from God. He said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So actually we have an obligation to show God's work in my life so that they could glorify God. How could they glorify him if they don't see it? So I have to say, God did this amazing thing for me so that they could say, wow, glory be to God for that. And they could feel, oh, I worship a great God who was able to do this thing.
maybe it's just a me thing. It's so like the idea of that is I want to be like that, but I feel like I'm always at battle with myself. Like,
I mean, there are some personalities that lend towards it versus not. I mean, I've known you long enough that you don't like talking about yourself in general. So, that might be something that makes it more difficult. But again, I will say like it's a command for us, right? To do those things. He didn't say, if it feels good for you, let your light shine, so that people, no, I have to do it. It's an obligation. Again, why does God give us these obligations? St. Paul tells us later, he's like, how can there be believers if there's not a preacher? And how can there be a preacher unless somebody is sent? So like we have to send someone and they have to be a preacher and they have to speak so that people can hear, so that they can be converted, so that their lives can be changed, that they be followers of Christ.
mm, yeah, this is definitely something I need to work on because I agree everything you're saying. It's just when I think of it in a way, it's almost like it's like a reflex for me that like
We should have another one about like evangelism and like the importance of really like being, I guess for me as a priest, it comes easy. People sort of assume and know, oh, something's up with this guy, the way he dresses, the way he looks, he must be some sort of religious something. So it
Mhm.
opens conversations that probably for you are a little bit more, not like don't come as naturally. You have to be a little bit more like forceful in doing that. But I do think it's important, and I don't think it's anything wrong, with being open about my faith. I respect others and I respect the faith of others, but it's okay for me to just speak about my life experiences. I mean, we do that in many aspects of our life. When you go to an amazing restaurant, you tell people about it. When you see an awesome movie, you tell people about it. So I mean, I think it's very similar.
Mm. The other thing I wanted to ask about is I guess I have two more, but they're relating to uh soon to be parents or like raising children.
Sure.
I feel like raising children, I don't know, 20 years ago or 30 years ago is very, very different than raising children now in the sense that our world has changed so much and society is really headed towards a negative direction. I know that's not a good excuse not to
Yeah.
have children, but it does bring up some worry. Like, I am afraid to raise children in this kind of world.
Yeah.
Is how can I get over that and kind of
Well, I would say the biggest thing that I would say is there is the world, which is what you see on TV and what's put in the media and things like that. And then there is the real world that is like, the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis. And, I would say that like, first of all, I would say every generation would say 20, 30 years ago, it was way different and way easier. Now it's way harder. I think every generation would say that. But what I was going to say is that I think sometimes we see, things on social media, see things on the mainstream media, and we tend to sensationalize things because actually that's what gets views, that's what gets attention. But on the day-to-day life, it's a lot different. You can see lots of examples of that. Like when you walk, like if you were to, for example, if you were to describe San Francisco, right? You might describe it as, oh my gosh, this place is so heathen, and how could people live? And like, because in the media, that's how it might be portrayed, right? But I am positive that there are many, many faithful, Christians living according to God's command, not just in San Francisco, but everywhere in the world. And all I would need to do is I just need to align myself with those like-minded people and live out that life. Like I don't necessarily need to convince the entire world. Do I need to display my faith to the entire world? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the church is just the light, but we don't force anybody into anything. When Christ, he said that he was talking about following the Christian path, he talks about it as the narrow way. When he talks about the flock of people, the followers of Christ, he says, do not fear little flock. So it's normal and has always been the case that the people who are going to truly and diligently follow Christ are going to be the few, not the many. I don't need to be waiting for everyone to be thinking the same way as I am. Even when, by the way, Christianity was like the religion of the people or the religion of the government and things like that. Like you think about the Holy Roman Empire, whatever. My bet would be how many people were truly and sincerely living a Christian life or were just Christian by name. I bet you would find a lot more of the latter than the former. People who are living truly a Christian life, because it's not easy, and not everybody who sees it will accept it. But it shouldn't be a reason for me to not have children. Actually, it should be a reason for me to be vigilant when I'm raising those children, that it's not going to happen automatically. We've talked about this before. Like maybe 100 years ago, it would have happened automatically that my kids would have Judeo-Christian values because that's the milieu in which I'm raising them. And that might not be the case for your children. So it's not going to happen automatically. It has to be something intentional that I am implanting within my children. But lucky for you, you're the person with the most influence over your child. If someone else has more influence over your child than you, there might be some blame on your end to be like, well, why? Why aren't you the one with the greatest influence over your children?
Mm-hmm. But I feel like on top of just that, like you have the world to worry about, and sure you can be diligent and
sure,
purposeful in the way that who you surround them by and the way that you raise them. But then a step past that, like let's say deciding if someone is ready to have children or not, or start a family or not. On top of that, there's the financials. And then on top of that, there's the, what if I don't think I'm spiritual enough to kind of be in this role? Where do you go from there? How do I set myself up financially, or say I'm good financially, I'm good spiritually? You know what I mean?
Actually, I think that, when you're thinking about like, when is a good time to have children? Me personally, I think that there is never going to be like an ideal time to have children, because children take up a lot of my emotional energy, physical energy, take up a lot of my financial energy. There's never going to be a good place or like perfect time, and so I think that's just a decision that you make, with your spouse, and you think about sort of, can we, but I, if I could give some advice, I wouldn't lean too much into, can we afford the child? I think that like, unless I really truly am living, paycheck to paycheck, not knowing where my next meal is coming from, I can afford a child by adjusting sort of my lifestyle. So I would hate to see money to be sort of a determining factor. Now, if you're thinking about having 12 kids, maybe that's something they would want to consider. But in general, I would encourage people to have families and to grow their families in the fear of God, and not too much to worry about perfect timing. I don't think there is sort of necessarily perfect timing.
What about for the spiritual aspect? Like I, for one, think I'm probably have a long way to go spiritually,
but I feel like I have a long way to go spiritually. We're always going to feel like we have a long way to go spiritually.
But I mean, from the sense of like, how can I sign up to be responsible for my child's spirituality when I can't even be accountable for my own, let alone my whole family's?
Well, a lot of times, for example, just a small example, sometimes people are a little bit far from God and they're not really following in his commands and things like that, but they're coming to church and, the priest will say, come and do the service. Say, well, I'm not equipped for service and I'm living a life that is, not the most whatever. Say, no, just come. And as they come, they recognize, what, I'm in service, so therefore I have a higher calling, and so I have to act in a different way, or I have to conduct myself in a different way, or carry myself in a different way. And being part of that service elevates them. So I guess my advice would be that my newfound responsibility can be an elevation of who I am. It's like, okay, you know what? Before, I'll give you just another practical example. Let's say you don't eat right, you don't exercise, okay? And then, next day, week away from or whatever, you have a heart attack, okay? When you wake up from the heart attack, all of a sudden you have all the motivation in the world to eat right and to exercise. Why? Because I've been put in this situation where I must. It's become very real for me that I must do it. Whereas before, it was just like, yeah, I know I should. Maybe when I have a kid, I think to myself, no, now I must. Before, it was my responsibility and my life, and I was ruining that, and that had its own consequences. But now I must, because I have someone else's life, to be accountable for.
I think that's a good, maybe like, I don't know the word, like a good extra to add on, but I don't think that should be a like reason that you have kids. You're like, oh, well, I need to fix
I'm not saying that's the reason you have kids. I'm sort of answering
like,
the question.
I wouldn't like bank on that,
I agree. You're asking the question of like, what do I do if I'm not spiritually ready? And I'm saying, having the child will be a big part of getting you spiritually ready if I'm taking it seriously. The fact that I'm asking that question means spirituality to me, my relationship with God is important, right? Whether that's, but I agree with you that like I'm not saying my spiritual life is bad. How can I fix it? Let me have kids. That's not the answer that I'm trying to give.
So on that same thought, I feel like having kids, you said obviously takes up your financial and your time
Sure.
and your energy in it. I feel like that could be or I guess
a stressor or a deterrent.
Yeah. And specifically with service, right? Like
Sure.
You now don't have as much time to serve because I have a child,
Yeah.
Is that a good reason to?
Well, so I would say a couple of things. First of all, I think it's pretty common, people are married and they have kids, especially when they have young kids.
Mm-hmm.
You will find them maybe drawing back from the service a little bit. Maybe they're not as involved and things like that. And I do think that there has to be a balance between, yes, truly with this new life or lives in our household, in our lives, that there have been adjustments that have to be made. But at the same time, keeping the Sabbath holy, this is a commandment. Praying to God is important. It's important now even more so than it was, when I was by myself. Serving God is a show how I show my discipleship towards God. So I still have to be like pushing towards those things. But in some ways, it may look different. For people who have young kids, you can't imagine, the difficulty it is just to get out of the door on time. It's, it's not an easy thing as, for yourself to brush your teeth, get dressed and leave. You have 2-3 other bodies that you have to account for. But at the same time, I can't use it as an excuse and say, no, you know what? We showed up to church super late. We don't serve anymore. We don't do this. We don't do that. We have kids, whatever, when we're older. Because it's not a switch that we can flip. It's a life. And even them, you want to immerse them in that life as young of an age as possible so that they feel like this is a natural outflowing of who we are.
What do you think about I don't want this to come off as rude. I feel like a lot of times that I go to church, it's great to see all the kids, right?
Yeah.
But there are some instances where the kids become a distraction and they just are let free.
Sure.
Obviously the most ideal scenario is, the parents are standing there and their children are with them and they look up and see their parents still and praying. Sure. So they want to do like their parents are doing, but kids are kids. They want to also run around. How do you kind of balance this? I know St. Verena is a little bit calmer than most other places because you kind of reserve the back and they can just step out of the church real quick. But
Sure.
there are other churches that,
Although not everybody would agree with you, I think.
well,
I think it's a common problem in Orthodox churches, because what's unique about Orthodox churches is we wouldn't separate the children from the adults when it's time for worship. You know, there are many churches say like, okay, the Sunday school's time is during the worship time, so
wow.
that the kids can get their Sunday school stuff going on and the parents can worship in peace, essentially.
Mhm.
And that has its own pros and cons. And for us as Orthodox Christians, we believe the liturgy is the climax of worship. And so to deprive the children of that, you know, even if they are fussy or difficult or get bored or whatever, no, it's important for them to attend and to learn and to commune, you know. What comes with that, of course, is, you know, crying and whining and running and all the things that kids tend to do. I think there needs to be a couple of things said. I think there has to be systems in place. You know, you mentioned a couple of things that we do at church, like we put the back, maybe having ushers, you know, that sort of thing. There should be systems in place in order to help keep the church as reverent as possible. But there also has to be like mutual understanding. You know, if you have a kid and he's screaming his head off, you don't love that either. It's not like everybody else without kids is looking at that and being like, I hate this. And you as the parent are like, oh, I really love this. This is amazing. You know, so there has to be mutual understanding with one another. You know, I have to be sincerely as a parent doing my best to maintain the reverence of the church. But at the same, like, so I can't be like negligent as a parent, and I have to do my due diligence to maintain the reverence of the church. Take my kid out, let him play for a couple minutes, take him on a walk. You know, my dad used to take me on walks outside of the church because I would be going crazy sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of my job as a parent. But for those of us who don't have children, or who've children who are older than that, sometimes the negative thing that we do is we forget. We forget what it was like maybe to have children. We forget what it was like to be that age. And we're like kind of like looking back and like, how dare they? And why don't they control their kid? And it's like, if I had a button where I could push and make my kid silent and compliant, I'd push it, you know, and it's not that easy. So I think that's part of what I was talking about in the family, in the context of the church. What I mean by that is, I said the family is the place where I hone my virtues, right? The church is also that place. You know, when I'm sitting next to a child and I don't have children, or I haven't had young children in decades, I remind myself of, or I bring myself into their mutual struggle, right? Like it's our problem now, right? We're in church worshiping together. It's our problem. It's not his problem that I wish he would take care of his child.
Mm-hmm.
It's our problem that we have to find a solution for. And we're working together to do that.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm like putting myself in these situations where I've been around the screaming kids, and
You just look back with some contempt, and you're
no.
just
When it's the kids that I know, like when it's my friends' kids,
you're okay.
I'm like, oh, that's so cute. Like, but when it's someone that I don't know's kids, I'm like,
I think that's a big lesson for us, actually. Like, and I don't think you're in the minority. I think most people have that same feeling, and so it kind of teaches us like, why do I have, why am I able to be tolerant of this one and not that one? And actually, you know what it is? It's the bond of love that you have between you and your friends, and of course, by extension, their children. And so, you know, that's a great call for us to like, hey, I need to extend that bond of love towards strangers, right? I have to be a lover of strangers because they are not strangers. They are part of the body of Christ. They are my brother and sister in Christ.
right. Especially, I mean, just being in church, that should be something that.
Well, I think we all say it and know it, but it's like it's like
hard to do in practice.
But see, the church gives us now this is an opportunity to practically practice that. You know.
So, what are some things that you've seen? Obviously, you deal a lot with families, and what's something that and this is something that I'm probably a little oblivious to because I had such a great family life. What are some struggles or active struggles that families go through that could cause them to have issues? I mean, I'll give an example. Like, I know for the like number one cause of problems within a marriage is like finances, because it's not something that's discussed prior. Is there something similar from a family sense that you see that causes a lot of tension or trouble between family units?
Well, I would say that like what families need more than ever is they need time together around Christ. Like, and some of it can be explicitly spiritual, and some of it can be just be, you know, implicitly spiritual. But they need time with one another. I think the world now divides us a lot. In the same way that I said, even the church divides us in sort of certain services. Like we get divided as a family unit. You know, you may have a family of 4 or a family of 5 or whatever, but this kid has soccer practice and this one has basketball and this one has this tournament and they're going to this place and doing this thing. And so they're not used to being together. And even when they are together, technology, the way it has been, sort of separates us. Everybody's sort of sitting on their phones and sort of in their own world. So we have to make sure we're prioritizing family time. Family time for leisure, like to doing fun stuff where it's just us, and family time for spirituality, reading the Bible, having a rundown of, hey, how was your Sunday and what did you learn in church, and praying together, all of those kind of things. I think if parents that are listening are anything like me, one of the biggest things that we think to ourselves is, how do I make sure that my child grows up in the faith the way that I was? And what I would say is sometimes we look at it incorrectly. We think to ourselves, if I throw my kid into things at church 24/7, they're just going to be ingrained in the church and they'll love the church and the church will be part of their life. And you know what? For some people that does work. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. It's good to encourage our kids to go to church. And we should encourage our kids to go to church. But more than anything, actually, if I have a good relationship with my kids, I invest in having a good relationship with my kids, they will want to follow in your footsteps in everything, by the way, because they look up to you. So working on that relationship will, by extension, get you the thing that you're looking for. So going to church together, serving together, being at home together, insisting on family time together, insisting on phone-free time together will create those bonds. Being patient, being a good listener in times of stress and difficulty for my children, for my spouse, whoever the case may be, that will tighten, strengthen those bonds so I can have influence. Just like I said when we were talking about Joshua, as for me and my house, we have influence because we have created a bond.
So there's always going to be outliers, right? Like you can do everything right and everything goes wrong, or you can do everything wrong and somehow it ends up being right.
Sure.
But would you say more often than not that like almost a recipe to raising a successful family can be found in what we talked about today? Like if I were to do everything as Christ-like as I could, do I have the best chance of success?
I'm setting them up for success, but I'm not guaranteeing anything because we have at the end of the day our own autonomy to choose. But we are setting ourselves up for success. Just like when I baptize a child, I am setting him up spiritually for success, right? He has the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. He's become a child of God. His sins are removed from him. But as he grows, he has the ability to accept or reject this baptism, right? I am just setting them on a path to success. To that point, one of the things that I have to mention, because I think it's so important, is sometimes we're super involved in the church as parents. And that's a wonderful thing. And we're servants and we're very involved. And then when like something happens in the church, people are doing something weird, the priest is doing something you don't agree with, servants are doing something you don't like, I can speak negatively about the priest, the servants, the church, whatever. And I have to be really careful with that because not that the church is above criticism. Sure, we can make mistakes. But if I constantly sort of speak about the church in negative terms, or speak about the priest in negative terms, or speak about my servants in negative terms, it's not that far-fetched and crazy that when your child begins to believe you, and starts to take on those same opinions. And then when you wonder, why does my son or daughter not want to go to church? Why doesn't he respect his servants? Why doesn't he listen to the priest when he gives him guidance? Well, I've sort of implicitly, probably not explicitly, but implicitly told him not to. When I talk poorly about them, when I say bad things about them, it's good for us to speak highly of those people and of those services. And of course, if there's criticisms, we bring them, but we bring them in their proper channels so that I don't be a stumbling block, to my kids. If me and my wife are sitting there talking about, how bad the Sunday school is, why would my kid want to go to Sunday school the next day? Even if I wasn't talking to them directly. I mean, they have ears, they can hear me,
Do you have any closing thoughts on family?
I will say that, raising a family, although it is difficult, raising a family in the fear of the Lord has so many benefits. I'll read from you for the book of Exodus. It says, "So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you." So here God is promising blessings to people who serve him. So how does our family benefit from serving from God together? Remember when I said to you, all the commandments of God are not arbitrary. They give us benefits here on earth and eternally. My whole family, if I'm serving the Lord together, are going to be bonded together. God is going to work through our lives, and we're going to see God's work in our lives. is going to make every member of our family to become, or give us the grace to become fruitful Christians. I will receive answers to my prayers. He's going to provide for the needs of the family. These are promises that God gives us. God knew that Abraham would influence his whole family to serve him, and he blessed him, you know. So by influencing, by training, you know, my family, I can like to teach them to serve God earnestly. I'm gonna receive blessings from God. So there's a blessing behind, you know, doing the work to raising a godly family.
I would love to see what kind of questions people are gonna have about this, because I feel like every question that would come from an episode like this would branch off into its own.
Sure. And I'm sure people will
episode.
speak a lot towards their own experiences as a father, mother, son, daughter, some very positive ones, some very negative ones.
Mhm.
And I think that'll bring some interesting discussion. Hopefully we can either do another episode or maybe reply to some of those comments, because I think it'll be very enlightening.
Sounds good. Okay.
All right.